Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wolf Watch Ornette. My name is Oscar Eveling, Education Manager at the Wilsonian FIU. We're pleased to have you here tonight for the continuation of our ongoing film discussions through Wolf Watch. We're excited to announce that tonight's program and the following will be co-organized in conjunction with Carter Jackson Brown of Brainville and Ad Hoc Cinema, staples in our community of all things jazz and film. Should you still need some more time to make your way through the film, our conversation tonight will provide you with key insights to show why we take this moment to pause and reflect on the legacy of Ornette Coleman. At the Wilsonian and throughout our collection, we constantly think to what it means to be modern, along with the turning points that have opened new pathways of thinking and being. Emerging from the traditions of jazz, and in turn synthesizing elements of science fiction, we look to Ornette as a precursor of many things to come, along with the radical potential afforded through improvisation. Joining us for this special conversation, I'm pleased to announce Carter Jackson Brown, again from Ad Hoc Cinema. And as we begin this program, I just want to pause and highlight the features down below for you all to send us your questions, which we'll look to answer in real time. So down below, the chat has been disabled, but the Q&A is available for everyone to tune into. And with that, Amir, would you be able to take us into the trailer and we'll segue from there. Thank you both for being here. Amir George and Carter Jackson Brown.
Immortality to the people, every man a god. How do you get to be a god? Well, put it apple pie country simple by doing your job and doing it well. What really makes me want to play music is when I really hear an individual thought pattern placed in an environment to make something actually come about that is not an obvious thing that everyone is doing. You can't see outside yourself, but we do have imagination. The expression of all individual imagination is what I call Harmolodics. And each being's imagination has their own unison. And there are as many unisons as there are stars in the sky.
I love that man so much. Ornette for me was such a breakthrough. When I first got into jazz, I guess I was in my teens, and I think most of us, if you grew up in America during specific periods of the 20th century, and then likely depending on your parents' influence or the environment, one way or another, you might have had some kind of encounter with jazz as a younger person, sort of subconsciously through the Peanuts gang and Charlie Brown. For me, that was kind of like the first experience of jazz with Vince Guaraldi and his work with Charles Schultz and all of those great TV shows, those Charlie Brown specials that came out that were always broadcast on television each year. That was like my early introduction to jazz, although I had no real conscious awareness that it was jazz. I just knew that it was just sort of a part of the fabric of the narrative that I was exploring through the Peanuts gang. I guess it wasn't until I got a bit older and I began to, there was this Warner Brothers cartoon, this old cartoon, and I don't know if you know it, but you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Three Little Bops. and it was basically you know, a bebop version of the Three Little Pigs and the Big Bad Wolf. And so it's super cool. It goes through all, you know, the House of Sticks, the House of Straw, the House of Bricks, and each time the Big Bad Wolf is this really terrible trumpet player that wants to be in the band with the trio of the Three Little Pigs. You know, they're super cool, they're hot, and you know, each player kind of is like sort of like, you know, the Dizzy Gillespie pig, the Charlie Parker pig, and the, you know, like the Max Roach pig, you know. And they're super cool, and each time the Big Bad Wolf comes in and he tries to join the band, and each time he blows and it's just terrible, and they kick him out. And then of course each scenario, you know, has him blowing up, you know, or burning down or whatnot. And so finally and the final one where he, you know, the Club of Bricks, he goes in and it's another fiasco. They kick him out and he decides to blow up the Club of Bricks, and instead he blows himself up and he goes down to hell. And at the end of the clip where the cartoon is almost over and they're really jamming out in the club, suddenly the Big Bad Wolf comes up from hell. His spirit comes up from hell and lands on stage onto a seat, and he starts playing the trumpet Miles Davis style, just super cool. And I'll never forget that as a kid, hearing one of the pigs say, "You got to be hot to play real cool." And so that was like the beginning of my understanding of this, like, okay, so this stuff is like really cool. That's, you know, I still didn't know a lot about it. And then as I became a bit older and started to really become aware of different musicians like, you know, Dizzy Gillespie, my earliest experience though was really through Miles Davis, and you know, those kind of like usual suspects. And typically when you get into jazz, it's usually that kind of like straight ahead, very safe, linear type of experience, unless you've had, you know, some initial influence from someone else that, you know, you may have been that kid that, you know, you just got dropped into the deep end, you know, by an older brother or a cousin or an uncle, or you just sort of grew up in a musical family and you just kind of know. But for me, my experience with Ornette Coleman came after I had already sort of, you know, fell in love with the music. And, you know, once you begin to understand the roots of the music and the direction that it takes, you then, you know, if you're really dedicating yourself to the exploration, which is, you know, what jazz is, you find people like Ornette Coleman. And so when I think most people usually when they come across Ornette, it's typically from his debut album, The Shape of Jazz to Come, which was he had already released a few other albums, but it was his debut release on Atlantic Records, The Shape of Jazz to Come. He didn't want to name it that title. He didn't want to be seen as a gimmick. He wanted to be taken seriously as a composer. But the record label was insistent on giving it that title, and so he went with it. And that for me was my introduction to him, and it really just opened me up to all these different sounds. You know, this sort of like mystery music. This like it felt very ghostly and mysterious and a little you know, very, very esoteric. I didn't know what to think of it, but it was very exciting, and it really opened me up to looking at the blueprint for this music. that, and after that, it was just, there was no turning back. Ornette, for me, led me in the direction to find, so many other fantastic creative musicians. How about yourself, man? When did you first, what was your first sort of like introduction? Was it the deep end? Did you just get dropped into the deep end, or?
Well, I would say I became more familiar with the filmmaker's work, like Shirley Clarke, before I became familiar with Ornette. I was introduced to like Shirley's work through the film like Portrait of Jason, which is a documentary she made about 20 years before she did this film. But like Shirley came out of an underground film, scene in New York, and started like meeting like different like musicians and making films, and like she actually met like Ornette through like Yoko Ono.
Right.
Um, in '68, and that's when they started filming this. The film didn't come out to '85, so it was kind of like this long like process where he actually like requested the film be made. But I feel like the film feels like a jazz album.
Totally.
It has a whole non-linear aspect to it.
Absolutely.
You have this archive that she's building off of, and it's not really like this chronicle of his life. It's more so like this like emulation of these like experiences that he's had throughout. But in coming in contact with his work, it was like very mystical. And as you can see, the image I have as the background,
yeah, man,
is a part of the film, but it's also like things that like he performed with. Like he performed like with these neons in front of him, which I think added like a cool effect in the film, and as well as his like live performance.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Shirley Clarke. I haven't seen a lot of her films. The film that I saw first in Ad Hoc Cinema, I had the pleasure of screening it in Miami at former Miami Beach Cinematheque, now O Cinema, Miami Beach, as a film called The Connection. And that's a great film that features like actual, and again, it goes back to her, her interest as a dancer, as an experimental artist. She was a product of that environment. It's safe to say that Shirley Clarke was one of the products of a jazz world, in the way that John Cassavetes, a lot of these, this new wave, this American new wave that was happening in the States in the late 50s, early 60s. All these filmmakers, artists, they were raised on this experimental perspective.
It's like they both have this like avant-gardeness to it.
yeah. And I mean, and I think that's, it's wonderful. This language that was, sort of permeating throughout really the entire art world. I know when I think of certain jazz musicians, I associate them with certain painters, like Eric Dolphy makes me think of Kandinsky. Charles Mingus makes me think of Goya. There's this interesting sort of correlation, in the art world of these sort of tentacles, sort of like connecting, like this grand sort of like telekinetic universe, that they all sort of share. But anyway, The Connection is a fantastic film, and it's literally a film about these, at a time when, at that time in particular, jazz was also seen as this kind of like demonic force. As we know in this country, in America, anything that's not considered a part of the status quo of quote unquote, white America, it is sort of it's demonized. It's ostracized in this in this way to keep young people from connecting, and you know, and so the film is kind of steeped in that sort of like, you know, reality of this sort of like, you know, the underground. And so Shirley created this wonderful film about these jazz musicians that are hanging out in this loft, and they're non-actors basically. She brought in Jackie McLean, alto saxophonist, who played with everyone from Charlie Parker to Miles Davis to, you know, you name it. He was also a very important composer and band leader himself, and along with Freddie Redd, who's a pianist and composer. And they're just jamming out, hanging out in this loft and waiting for their drug connection. And it's just a great, you know, it runs like a play. They never leave that loft, so you feel like the viewer, as a viewer, you're there watching this take place on stage. And Shirley was just really wonderful at allowing the allowing the improvisation to just take over, and capturing these you know, these candid, you know, moments, and these fluid, you know, conversations that intersected very much like jazz. And so it makes a lot of sense that she incorporated that into, you know, her film style, and then of course to later come into contact with Ornette.
This quote I read from her was that speaks on more of her like cinema like verite style, is like trying to find the truth of like placing herself in the camera in these moments and in these settings to try to find like a closer like realm of reality outside of what the capture is capturing. But also like she's like provoking a lot here and there. I would say in her past film like Portrait of Jason, you hear her voice a lot, but in this film she's only there so much. I think she just allows things to kind of happen in a very like improvisational way. And also how it's blended with the performance, and it's something to say about the editing techniques too, as far as how they play off this rhythm. I think one thing I find more interesting about the film is about her use of very early like video techniques, like in this photo right here, like we see that on the screen, which is kind of like you could tell it's just placed there,
right,
in like a post type
right
of situation. But you know, like she employs all these, you know, like video techniques that were very like new, but also
right
it's something to say about this being her last film.
right
So it makes it kind of like a culmination of all these styles that she like picked up on throughout the years.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that aspect, just because it takes place in 80, you know, the film was released in 85. So this is like right in the middle of the 80s when, you know, the arcade and like video, you know, home video game system explosion was happening all over the country, really all over the world. And so I love how, you know, you kind of looking back on that, it's, you know, it's clearly it's like, you know, this sort of like relic, you know, style, you know, but it's also, you can see that, you know, she's clearly attempting to really activate this idea of futurism, that she's.
I will also add there were some awkward reenactment scenes. I don't know how other people feel about this, but they were kind of like just awkwardly filmed. But that was her style, and that was the way she was, you know, trying to reinterpret Ornette's experiences.
No, go ahead, finish that. I'm sorry.
I was gonna bring up this other clip.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's that? The Harmolodics?
I believe so.
Okay, before you say that, I want to add to what you're saying. Yeah, I think that goes back to, you know, these sort of like awkward, you know, sort of like, you know, not so tight, you know, techniques. I think it spoke of her, you know, of her ability to just kind of like put it out there and let it go. You know, the idea of like free jazz and improvisation is to, you know, you got to be okay with the mistakes, right? I think that made Shirley's work so captivating, you know, that she removed herself from that confine, you know, and just freed herself. And that kind of like fluxus, you know, mentality, which, you know, being friends with Yoko Ono, I think that says it all. And by the way, Yoko's debut album, Yoko and the Plastic Ono Band, actually features Ornette Coleman's quartet on one of the tracks.
Okay.
And you know, Yoko opened up John Lennon, and you know, it just, I find these figures, you know, to be so very, very important and freeing us from our own insecurities, if you will, you know, as creatives. So anyway, we're gonna watch this clip. This is, by the way, kind of a description of Ornette's theory, because what Ornette did, you know, in breaking this sort of mold of this sort of like linear, straight ahead compositional style. You know, you had bebop, which was like, you know, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Dizzy Gillespie, Max Roach, you know, Bud Powell. They all established this really kinetic sort of post-war awareness into the music, and you know, and so there was this, you know, feeling of like, you know, the men and women, you know, men particularly coming back from the war. They had been disillusioned. They, you know, black men in particular were coming back to an America that still had, you know, these shares of horror, you know, that they were having to deal with. And so, you know, the idea of bebop was to sort of like really throw that world back out into you know, out and project that experience. And it was very, very structured. What Ornette did was he sort of took all of that awareness and that understanding and that knowledge and just sort of like created a wormhole, like a portal. He basically just threw all the parts down, reconstructed it, and put it back together. And you know, for a long time, people were wanting to know, you know, what is this? What are you? You know, he was ridiculed. And we'll watch another video after this, you know, discussing that his contribution to free jazz. But in order for him to really describe, you know, not only to the public and to the players, but also, you know, for himself to really begin to, you know, create sort of this scientific understanding of this freedom, which he called Harmolodics. And so let's take a look at this video of him describing just that, Harmolodics.
I think of myself as a composer, and I have written music that I now call harmolodic.
You remove the caste system from sound.
You know, you were talking about the beyond the caste system. Well, I think the first thing beyond the caste system is everyone's personal belief. Everyone has that, and yet they're not able to exercise that because of the survival of collective knowledge. Because basically, education is taught to you in a uniform way, and you are graded that way. In other words, the education that's very expensive, someone has to know that you know something. But the education that's not expensive, no one has to know that you know it, but you, right? That's very homilodic. The only truth that exists in harmonic is the will to do it without you trying to being uniform. Like the alphabets that gives people meaning to names, to directions, and to intelligence, harmonic is a word that can be used in a way where it's serving more than one purpose for a person. It is not something that destroys. It's more something that makes things grow, makes things more clear.
Yeah.
You know, and he Ornette, explored that theory throughout his entire life, and as years progressed, of course, he in the beginning he was quite ridiculed for his truth in his art, which we've seen this happen in many forms. I think we were talking yesterday about how, for instance, like in the way that photography wasn't considered an art form in its early stages, until people like Ansel Adams and O'Keeffe and members of that sort of early movement of modern photography were acknowledged as such. And the same thing happened with with rap, with hip hop. It wasn't considered real art.
I think it could be said for like video.
Right. Exactly.
On the same type of level.
And so we owe a great deal to artists like Ornette Coleman, because they are trailblazers. They, it's an unapologetic, journey that oftentimes artists like that don't reap any benefits during their lifetime. However, Ornette was fortunate enough to get recognized as a very important figure while he was alive, and he was able to do that by giving free jazz this platform that he established, sort of scientific legitimacy, or if you will. We are just I could talk about this for 3 hours. So I'm gonna have to sort of stop myself. Why don't we do this, since we watched the video? Let's sort of jump into this just for 3 minutes. This is a video of retelling the debut of Ornette Coleman's "The Shape of Jazz to Come," that was released in 1959, featuring Charlie Hayden on bass. Don Cherry on trumpet, and I think it was Billy Higgins on drums. And this is their debut at the 5 Spot in 1959. This is the first time that anyone in New York, where all the hip stuff was happening, are introduced to this music. So let's and the language of Ornette Coleman. Let's watch this 3-minute clip, and then let's really dig in here.
Cool.
Toward the end of 1959, the Ornette Coleman Quartet came to New York for the very first time with the prophetically titled "The Shape of Jazz to Come." They were all but unknown, but those who were hip to the scene were there to check out the band's New York debut at the 5 Spot.
We couldn't wait. Went down to the 5 Spot and had a rehearsal. one afternoon, and then we opened up. There were lines around the block. The place was packed with people, so it was quite a deal.
The opening night, they had everybody. Everybody was there. And so he was kind of on auditory trial, so to speak.
And we couldn't wait to get to work and play because the music was so great and new and fresh.
That's when the shape of jazz to come is, dropped on the New York jazz scene.
That first night of Ornette was a sacco impact and unforgettable. I don't think I ever heard four musicians who gave me the impression of surrounding me. I was in the middle of it. Bang.
We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. We must get ready for it. Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony. Act fast.
Coleman spoke the paranoia that existed in the nuclear age. The reaction that many people had just to this idea that the entire world could be blown up.
Play music with this urgency, this desperate urgency to make something new that's never been before, as if you're on the front line and you're risking your life for every note you play.
Well, I was there the opening night, and I was really unprepared for the hostility. I was sitting next to Roy Eldridge, and Roy was a warm, generous guy, and he was listening to Ornette, and he said, "He's just jiving, man. That's not music."
People were saying it was random, it was chaotic, it was this or that.
There were people who became angry at the music and let it be known that they hated it.
I mean, I don't think I need to say anything. That pretty much sums up the explosive work of Ornette Coleman, or really to anyone that's ever sort of like initially, encountered his music. And Shirley Clarke there couldn't have been a better filmmaker to sort of recreate that visual world, she was such a fascinating human being and dedicated her life to exploring the lesser, known regions of the American experience, Was there anything in the film that really stood out for you that
Well, I think, one thing I think that is my favorite part about the film is that it's his homecoming for Ornette.
Right.
You open up with the film. He's in Fort Worth. He's
Correct.
getting to the city. He's also, like playing with the big hometown orchestra.
Right.
Kind of are introduced to him as this very large figure already before we get to know more of his, secrets and magic.
Right.
So I think that's something because, it's like a people that's like waiting to see him. And we see like a crowd of folks that's more like in nice clothes and, like tuxedoed out with dresses. And it's something you don't expect given how like the music sounds. But, it's this really big opening that like plays throughout the film.
I really enjoyed that. I also loved his relationship with his son, Donardo, who at 10 years old was, played with his father on a Blue Note record, in 1966.
Yeah.
That really
who also like pretty much grows up through the film.
Yeah.
film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And you know, what we I think what the film provides is this wonderful sort of, sort of palette, that you can sort of like, you know, growing up in Fort Worth, Texas in the, the first sort of, half of the 20th century was not a warm place to grow up as an African American. And again, this sort of like, for me, Ornette Coleman, even before Sun Ra, should be also, and I'm sure he is, recognized as really kind of the one to start to kind of really plant that seed of Afrofuturism, that later Sun Ra, and of course George Clinton, and others would adopt and really begin to like, broaden that awareness. But people like Ornette Coleman, Charlie Christian, who also happened to be from Texas, guitarist, electric guitarist. He was considered to be, he's from Corpus Christi. He was considered to be the genius of the electric guitar. He brought to the electric guitar sounds that no one else in the States had really approached. I think maybe the closest person to, outside of America was Django Reinhardt in the 30s. But it's this this experience, the Black experience, that Shirley Clarke was very interested in exploring, because what she really saw was, as a woman, as a filmmaker, a female filmmaker, clearly, the odds are against her in an industry, in a male-dominated industry. This experience resonated with her, and she dedicated, her entire career as a filmmaker to uncovering these truths, of the American experience, which, you have to be, I just can't imagine, a world without artists like these, I know we're getting kind of, I just want to be cognizant of time.
Yeah. Are there any like questions from the audience?
Yeah, and then maybe we can continue to.
Hello. So thank you guys for that kind of just groundwork kind of being laid to kind of really get more into the film, understand really where Shirley's coming from, where Ornette's coming from. And so for all you tuning in, hopefully you do have a chance to make your way through the film. And please, we encourage you to send your questions. I think just before getting to that though, I just want to have a chance to maybe just run a few things by you and really kind of delve into this idea of improvisation, which is so central for Ornette, and in turn really kind of what is pivotal and influential in terms of this development within the jazz genre. So I think just the first thing that comes to mind is how improvisation is just seen as creation in the moment, on the spot, and just almost kind of divinely kind of inspired. And in a sense, some people discredit that because there isn't kind of this fuller context for what's happening. But improvisation really gives us that insight into these years of experience, these years of refining the craft, and specifically when it comes to jazz, this notion of woodshedding. So I just want to hear a little more from both of you, how you see that reflected in the film, just the importance of improvisation, and perhaps how Shirley riffs on that in her specific approach.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely very present. You could tell in how she's like capturing some of the images as we're seeing with Ornette is talking like to the rest of the band, and he starts to go on a tangent, and she's like filming everybody, but she's out of focus when she gets to Ornette, and also like it's a light stand in the frame, so she has to make like this quick adjustment, and I switch the camera back before she goes back to Ornette, even though he's done what he's saying. So I feel like the throughout the film, as she's capturing these conversations, it's a whole improvisational style of shooting, of just trying to get the best of the moment while trying to, like capture the room in its entirety. Yeah, also that plays a factor like in the performances on how she's, going close ups on the saxophone, and also like basing it off of like his motions and his movements like as he's playing.
Yeah, I really, again, I like to think that Shirley was always learning, always searching and allowing herself to, maybe miss those opportunities and be okay with them. The fact that she didn't edit a lot of that out too speaks of her freedom, and also this, unapologetic approach to the design. I think, the world that they shared often seen, was often, critically, viewed, and they just, they stayed true to their convictions throughout. I really like that. What they show in the film, some of my favorite stuff is particularly just that when he's the homecoming, which is that's classic. Oftentimes the hometown boy has to leave home, to explore and grow and evolve, and then come back as this champion, and is revered. And I really, a lot of people, I think it's really important to really, if you can, make your way through some of Ornette's work. What was happening, again, just real quick, during that era of, as when Ornette dropped The Shape of Jazz to Come, just before that, maybe 10 years prior, Miles Davis, along with Gil Evans and, a number of other sort of like younger players in that sort of second generation bebop era, wanted to sort of stretch out and slow down everything and begin to sort of incorporate sort of longer, extended works and using, traditionally classical instruments like French horn and tuba and oboe. And so a little further down, when Ornette's sort of school of thought came along, there was a continuation of that marrying of both classical and jazz, which at that time was considered third stream. And so you had a lot of artists that were composers, like legitimate classical composers, that were interested in the avant-garde in the way that, say, Stravinsky was interested in jazz. This one particular composer that collaborated with Ornette Coleman named Gunther Schuller, he and Ornette worked together and devised a very abstract, string-oriented environment that was, one, was used to also legitimize music, but two, to explore further out into the regions of improvisation. And so I really love that Shirley, sort of introduces Ornette in this setting after about, 20 plus years of exploring and, wanting to be recognized as an American classical composer and not just a jazz musician. That is an argument that's continuing to this day. But that for me was like really, really cool to see him recognized. And then, his work is acknowledged and, and many over the years has been, presented all over the world with, musicians like, Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers to, Sean Lennon to Patti Smith. He laid the groundwork for, pretty much every free thinking musician that you can think of. If you went to their house, there would be an Ornette Coleman album in their collection, if not several. So kudos to Shirley for, to me, that's her swan song, her final contribution to the film world. I think it's very symbolic that it happened to be a film about, one of the most, controversial creative musicians on the planet,
For sure.
I guess we should take questions because I'm sorry about that. I get.
Nah, man. Like, it's great. It's like
To hear that.
improvisation jazz.
Yes. Yes. Do we have any questions by any chance, or?
I think echoing kind of this notion of legitimacy. So getting rid of the word legitimacy was a comment we just received. And kind of really just following from your kind of observations, Ornette really is kind of bringing all these different elements and traditions together, right? From the classical composition to this free jazz thinking, and really kind of finding a common thread through all of that. And so I think perhaps maybe if we look at Amir, just that image in your background. So that was a logo that we see kind of present throughout the film in different capacities, right? So the double triangle, the square, the circle. And so I'm not sure if this was a specific, oh, there we go, exactly. Thanks, Torrance. Yeah. But in a sense, it's the synthesis of different elements into a cohesive and unified whole. And that's what I see reflected in terms of Buckminster Fuller and his own kind of conception of space. Absolutely. I think Ornette highlights that specific just impact that Buckminster had on his practice. And so he sees that specific structure almost as the evocation of his own music. Yes. I'm curious maybe just to end on the last clip that was shared, The Shape of Jazz, of Things to Come, Jazz to Come. In a sense, it almost feels that we accept it. And I think it's after seeing the film that it's just this, in terms of aligning the editing and the pace to that of the music, jump cuts from different types of sources, both from the cinéma vérité, which you kind of cite, Amir, but also just kind of these reenactments. So again, kind of bringing in these different things together into a whole, I think really strikes differently after having a better awareness of the film. And so I'm wondering if anything kind of stood out for both of you in just seeing that in this just like BBC documentary kind of space, which I think really echoes a lot of Shirley's own representation.
Mir?
Yeah, I mean, I like that she strays from conventions, just in her style. In regards to that particular clip, I think it just further, gives insight and around like what like he was going for, and his just thinking around like aesthetics. But with Shirley, I would say it's really like she's like going towards these new like styles of cinema with taking like her past like knowledge of the things that she's created before, and it's kind of like this ultimate culmination, like this clashing of these two, because like Ornette already has this like visual style, because his music is so visual, and he has these neons that he performs with. I think that Shirley just takes what the imagery that he offers through his music and through his sonics, basically like, sonically, and takes that and makes that her own type of thing.
Yeah. Was that, did you ask about The Shape of Jazz to Come, that little clip, Oscar?
Yeah, just kind of the structure to it, perhaps how they themselves kind of sought to emulate a little bit of the format, and again, as a reflection of the music.
It's cool, like the old clips, the instructional, videos of how to protect yourself in case of, nuclear, threat. I think it spoke to a lot of just the climate of the times, and that to me is also, I thought it was really fascinating, because it's like, all right, everybody's already kind of like juiced up and fearing, the end. And here comes this artist that just brings this even like, it's like, it's as if, okay, we're all here. Now I'm going to really give you the truth. And oftentimes the truth is very hard to swallow, which is what the guy at the club was saying about Roy Eldridge, a trumpet player, saying, man, this guy's jiving. This isn't real music. You know, it's like there's that immediate, denouncement. You know, it's like, get that out of here. That's not, this tastes terrible. What is this? Until you immerse yourself in it, and then you begin to sort of get a taste for it, and then sort of begin to understand and kind of incorporate it into your world a little bit. But oftentimes, a lot of people had no context, and so Ornette Coleman really, not only did he bring a new language, but over time, he provided the contextual narrative so that people could really begin to understand. Because now, this form of expression is global, it's universal, and it's also very ancient too. There are indigenous cultures that have been exploring these polyrhythmic, sort of non-linear expression for centuries. So again, Ornette's not doing something necessarily that was completely like unheard of, like new, but what he was doing was he was sort of like recapturing the this language that of the world around us, and that folks like Bjork, Abbey Lincoln, Aphex Twin, it goes on and on. This and what Buckminster was doing, who he was considered a kook. A lot of his work was not realized because people could not conceive in their realistically how to approach these angular perspectives. And so Shirley was doing the same thing with her work. People are still discovering her work. Shirley Clarke's influence on experimental filmmaking and really video art, like you were saying earlier, Amir. She was also a video artist. She played with a lot of things, and in the way that Stan Brakhage, offered a lot of sort of this platform for experimental video work that MTV benefited from. But anyway, I again, we could, if you want another hour, we can go.
I think just this is about getting everyone excited about the film and really kind of prompting a closer engagement.
See the film. Absolutely see the film. Expose yourself to this music, to this language. It's vital. It's imperative. If you are to, if we are to better understand one another, and to see how alike we are in all of our complexity, it's through this creative medium that we can do this. Jazz in particular was always considered one of the earliest sort of seeds of the civil rights movement, and how to make that diversity really work, right? And so if you're not a big jazz fan, but you're compelled just from the work of these two giants, let that be your gateway. Let that be your gateway drug.
Along those lines, and perhaps kind of really bringing us kind of all together in the conversation, I think you referenced it, Carter, in terms of the blueprint for the future. We did have a question. I just want to kind of hear your reflections on both of you. How can musicians today, whatever style they practice, absorb and positalitize the ideas of freedom and equity so that our music is transformative and a vehicle for change? So I think this is presented in terms of music, but I think can be applicable to the arts. And so, Amir, definitely welcome your thoughts in terms of filmmaking.
Yeah, I think being open-mindedness never goes wrong. I think that's the immediate thing I think about in the answer to this question of and creating resources, like for the community in a way. I think that's all kind of, it's like an organic way that things kind of come about. And I think open-mindedness of being aware of what's happening with others kind of bridges that gap between one's like personal work. But that's my take on it as a filmmaker.
Don't be afraid to walk into a space that's unfamiliar. Exposing yourself. One of my mentors, composer and educator, Anthony Braxton. He's a multi-instrumentalist, also out of Chicago, like Amir. He was one of the early founders of the AACM, which stands for the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. And one thing that he told me once was that listen to everything that you can so you know what not to do. Mm. And that, you can take that and reinterpret that many ways, exposure, don't be afraid to go out on a limb and listen to bad music. That's good. That's important too, because what you're really doing is you're exercising your frequency, that to me will really open you up and make you a very strong swimmer, but just, no fear, no apologies. You don't owe anybody anything, what you owe is to yourself, to push forward, because, it's all about cross-pollinating. The natural world shows us that, to me, that's our greatest attribute, is that we are able to influence one another and pass down tradition, and to break rules. We need those. We need restructuralists. We need stylists. We need thinkers. In this world, that we're living, we know how important it is to have a voice, and that goes for all classes and it's so important right now, more than ever.
Well, Carter, on that note, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Amir, a pleasure as well, tuning in from Chicago. Carter and Shenandoah, thank you all joining us tonight for the special conversation. We'll be back in November 18th with a special guest, Andrew Batawid, looking at the last age of history. And so continuing thinking about the legacy of science fiction, jazz, and in turn, the coalescence in Afrofuturism. Thank you all and stay tuned.
Awesome. Cheers.
Amir, Carter, thank you. Have a good night, everyone.